Hi, as you could see over the last couple of videos, I've been machining a bunch of parts, and with that I've gotten quite a good workflow in how I go from an idea to a finished part. So today I want to go over the process and highlight some things that work for me to get the most amount of part for my limited CNC. I split it up into multiple topics and there will be timestamps in the description, so feel free to jump around. The first thing then is what I look for when designing a part that I want to machine on my hobby CNC. I want to go over my current thoughts on cam setups and work holding, and also the process of how I get set up on the machine to limit mistakes and avoid crashes. Also some speeds and feeds as well as coolant. And as sort of a disclaimer, all the things that I want to talk today about are things that I learned either on the internet myself or I picked up as I go. So take it with a grain of salt. And if you have any ideas or comments, please let me know.
The machine that I'm using is a DIY CNC with a bit more than 300 by 200 millimeter table area. It's a quite basic system running Linux CNC and open loop stepper drivers, as well as a common import spindle. So I think the points that I will mention today are applicable to a wide range of machines, such as desktop CNCs and routers.
So when designing a part to be machined on a sort of mid-sized hobby CNC like mine, the thing that influences it the most is the limited usable tool height, and I will explain it in a second. My machine uses a generic water-cooled 1.5 kilowatt spindle, and with this I've gotten good experience with everything up to a 6mm tool in aluminum and some plastics. I've also tried 8mm tooling, both for roughing and sort of normal end mills, but I could not really utilize them yet, meaning that I could not get good feeds and speeds. But I don't think it's a huge problem because you can get a lot done with the quote-unquote smaller tooling. Where it does play a role though is the usable tool length. So here I have a collection of end mills that I mostly use. Starting with the 6mm free flute, which has 18mm of usable flute length and is sort of the workhorse tool. There's the 6mm 2 flute variety for a higher depth of cut, even though this has a 50mm of flute length. There are 3 and 4mm single flutes for deeper, shallower cuts, and there are also 3, 4 and 5mm free flute options for smaller features. You can also see me use this wider tool quite often, however this is only for surfacing. So most of the end mills that I can use on my machine have somewhere between 15 and 20mm of usable flute length, even though usually less than 6mm of those are actually engaged during a cut. You can get longer end mills to avoid rubbing if you want to go deeper, however you will still run into the same issue. And the issue here is that with a stick out of more than 25mm, both the machine and the end mill don't sound happy anymore. This is because I'm basically right at the rigidity limit of my spindle. What this means then that this maximum stick out of 20 to 30mm limits then how I design a part. So with that I usually try to stay around 20mm of Z height and if necessary make 2 parts of it which I then screw together. The other thing is that I try, as you do, to design parts where most of its features can be done in one setup or operation. So I would say most of the parts that I design are basically 2.5D sketches. And what I mean by that, it's basically 2D sketches stacked on top of each other. This is especially important without high-end equipment and higher machining tolerances, as a solid reindexing is not always feasible. However, you can still get a lot done even with those limitations. And by planning with them in mind, it makes machining a lot more enjoyable. So something that also influences the design, but more the cam setup and the tool paths, is what kind of stock material I have on hand. As this is a hobby for me and I do already spend quite a bit of money on it, I try to get the materials a bit cheaper. This is why instead of purchasing specific materials, I get most of the stock from eBay in form of offcuts. Some in bundles and some in fixed size plates. I do think some vendors are overselling their waste material, but with a bit of going through the listings, I had good experience so far, and some do even sell specific types of aluminum. But you can never be completely sure what you're getting. So if the milling strategy isn't working out, it might just be the mystery alloy that you got, which is just not good to machine. So before and after designing a part, I will go through my stock material and see what I have and possible multiples of it, just in case something goes wrong and I have to redo the part. For example, for this part of the CoXY stage, I wrote down the component dimensions of 66 by 34 by 80mm and found 4 suitable pieces that were somewhere in the right shape. I usually aim for 3 to 4 mm larger in X and Y and a minimum of 2mm in Z, with the height being the determining dimension most of the time. This, as most of the stock material is either 10, 15 or 20 millimeters thick, and designing a part to be around 80 millimeters gives me 2 mil in Z, and with that just enough material to hold onto in the vise. Here with this part in the end, for example, then there was half a millimeter clearance during milling, but as they say, clearance is clearance. If there's not enough material in the Z dimension to be able to hold it in the vise, and the next size up in terms of stock material means that I just have to remove a lot of material, I sometimes revert to the YouTuber's favorite work holding technique, the superglue. This mostly happens if the part is, for example, 10 millimeters thick and I have good 10 millimeters stock material. Here I don't want to use my 15mm material and just remove 1/3 of it. This type of work holding also allows me to still be able to machine all important features in one setup. Overall, I've gotten quite good results with the superglue work holding after trying out some combination of consumables. However, I try to avoid it as the parts can still move about. And if I use it, I usually reduce the width of cut and watch the temperature of the part. This can also be the result of my milling strategy, but especially smaller parts tend to heat up during milling, which can loosen the glue bond. This especially for the glue of the tape, which then leads the parts to be violently ejected. On the other hand, heating up the glue bond with a heat gun is a good way to get the parts free. I've also used superglue without any tape, which eliminates some of the problems but leads to a lot more cleanup afterwards. Using glue with or without tape also limits the type of coolant that I can use. I will go into this in a bit more detail later on, but for example WD-40 or isopropyl alcohol should not be used as a coolant when using superglue. If there's no excess material in Z, I've also used screws and bolts to hold the parts down. So drilling and tapping holes that the part will have anyways for mounting things, and then take a sacrificial hold-on piece to screw the part onto it. Perfect alignment can be a bit tricky without using locating pins or dowels, so it's more a rare case for me, but not too bad in my experience. When I found some suitable stock parts that could work, or a bigger piece of material that I can cut the desired shape out of, I get the dimensions and then go back into the CAM program. For the CAM then I set up my stock dimensions and then follow the general outline. Planing the top surface using the largest tool that I have, followed by a 2D adapter for removing most of the material and leaving about 0.25mm radial stock. Followed by pockets for larger or non-round holes or channels as well as internal features. Followed by contours to get the part into its final dimensions and include some spring passes. And then finishing off with spot drilling for drilling and optional tapping afterwards, as well as chamfering. And if the workpiece is held in the vise, I then usually do a second operation on the underside, most of the time just using a surfacing technique to get the final side to dimensions. I also like to export a drawing where I can mark certain dimensions that I want to check afterwards, as well as drill and tap sizes. Sometimes I also do a printout and take it with me for easier reference. Another thing that helps to reduce errors is a sort of checklist when I get set up on the machine. For this, I first get the tools that I will need, the collet holders as well as the stock ready. If the base block is larger than the stock material that I modeled, I used my bandsaw to get it into rough dimensions. Here a bit smaller is always better than having excess material, which can lead to sudden spikes in tool load. And after turning on the machine, these are the following steps that I follow. First is homing, followed by checking the tool table. Here I make sure that all my tools are listed and that there are no X and Y offsets, as these offsets are already accounted for in a G-code and would otherwise be doubled. I then place the material and load my first G-code. This is followed by loading my first tool or the touch probe using the M6 command. At this point I always make sure to move my touch probe or tool above the workpiece. Otherwise, if there is any horizontal movement, it could run into my part. This is followed by getting the origin by touching off, either with my digital probe, the manual probe, or just with the first cutting tool and offsetting it by the tool radius. When using a cutting tool, I like to run the spindle at around 1200 RPM. Here, the live machine view can help you spot any mistakes. After touching off, I like to see if the current position shown makes sense in relation to the origin position. And if everything seems okay, it should be set up and I can hit run. Speeds and feeds, I think, are something quite personal, and I'm not an expert. However, for me, I hit good speeds and feeds if there's no obvious chatter, no excessive noise, the chips are somewhat uniform, and the chips have some material to them. With a new tool, I usually start somewhere around 1600 RPM spindle speed, so I can increase and decrease it. And then look at the chip load and aim for something around 0.02 to 0.04 mm, and with that calculate my feed rate. For the depth and width of cut, I usually stick to the recommendations from the Sonos Machine Works or NYC CNC chart, which lists a width of cut of 5 to 25% and a depth of cut of up to 200%, but I usually stick at around 100%. This for normal end mills. I also purchased software like the HMS Advisor for a month here and there to get an idea about the cutting forces and deflection. Tools like this are great, especially at the start, to see what influences the cut the most. Here an interesting finding is that, at least according to their calculations, I never use much of the 1.5 kilowatt that my spindle has to offer, because I usually run into the limitations caused by cutting forces way before that. For most milling, I stick to below 3 kilograms of cutting force because otherwise there could be vibration and chatter. And at around 1.5 kilogram, the CNC is cutting quieter than my silent compressor, which is mounted around 48 decibel. At these settings, and I'm still removing quite a bit of material, the spindle is supposedly needing around 100 watt. And I don't think that is too far off because the watt meter that I have at the plug shows that the entire machine usually needs around 400 watts during continuous cutting. This is including everything. So 400 watts for the spindle, the motors, the pump, the lights, and everything else. In the end, the cutting parameters that I use are still a lot of trial and error, but I like these tools to get a starting point before I mess around with the machine. Here I then take those base values and then use the override sliders in Linux CNC for spindle speed and feed rate to see if it gets better or worse, mostly by listening to it. And then taking notes in a quite iterative process. In the end, it also really depends on what I want to achieve with the cut and the tool. If it's to remove bulk material and I will use the tool a lot, I do spend some time tweaking it. But if it's just to reach somewhere and remove a bit of material, I don't sweat it too much. Here also lubrication and cooling comes into play, because I think adding some fluid to your milling helps you get away with not so perfect speeds and feeds. It makes the cut more forgiving and leaves you a bit more headroom. For the lubrication and coolant, I use sprays like WD-40, emulsion lubricant, as well as isopropyl alcohol. This with the latter two being distributed by my cheek fogging system, also called minimum quantity lubrication. For this, my 400 watt compressor is almost up for the task if I limit the pressure to the fogging system. At 2 bar or 30 psi, there's always some fluid that is delivered, but not enough airflow to really clear out pockets and all the chips. So it's more just a way to deliver some medium to the cut while not flooding the area. This as my machine is not set up to handle large amounts of coolant. Limiting the pressure to the fogging system to at around 2 bar also caps the duty cycle of my compressor to around 40%, so I don't have to worry about overheating it. Right now I mostly use isopropyl alcohol because it leaves no residue and is less sticky than the emulsion lubrication. However, the big drawback is that you need to air out the enclosure and the entire room quite often. This is as breathing large amounts of solvent, which will evaporate during something like a 15-minute cut, is not healthy at all. Excessive use of isopropyl alcohol can also soften glues. This is to be kept in mind when you use super glue or tape as a work holding technique. The same goes for WD-40 or other sprays which have solvents in them. However, there are some things or steps that I don't do in my CNC, and that is mostly drilling and tapping, and that for two reasons. First, my spindle likes to run at quite high speeds, even for small drill bits. And second, sometimes it's just faster to do it manually on the drill press. Combining a drilling cycle with thread milling, however, is something that I want to get into. I've purchased some thread mills and will give it a try soon, but haven't gotten around to it yet. And if you have any tips or recommendations, please let me know. Also, and especially in the beginning, I didn't use any chamfering tools and manually debored my parts after the milling. However, using the mill with the right tools gets you really nice and consistent chamfers. And that is why I've gotten more into the habit of moving this step into the CNC part. So these are some of the things that I keep in mind when doing my builds. And as said, it's mostly things that I picked up along the way and work well for me. Let me know what you think, and I will see you in the next one.